Hey everyone. So here in America, and I assume in other places around the world, we are always forced to see life through the lens of race. How it pertains to what race you're from, dictates, where you live, what school you go to, a lot of things that maybe it shouldn't. And I feel like a lot of this is tied to our nation's origins and how it interacted with races, how it dealt with races in, even our founding documents and everything. And, there's always a lot of conversations about, what the founders meant and what the nation means and, through the view of race. And there's always different kind of viewpoints about it. And whatever it is, it's there. And there's a lot of this kind of, we don't want to talk about it because of X, Y, and Z, or we need to talk about it for X, Y, and Z. My point is that it's not to go into a lecture about who's right, who's wrong, what racial viewpoint is right, just that it exists. And, throughout my life, I've had different views about race, since I was aware of it as a little boy. And through the most part of my adulthood, I kind of felt that people have a view of race, just like I do, and it's core to their being. And, some of it is just a matter of this is what I've been taught, and, I'm going to maintain this until something makes me think different. And more, I'm beginning to feel like race is an issue that I think for a lot of us, and I'm trying to be vague because I don't want to get into that argument, but I'm trying to relate this to something. Is that for a lot of us, it is, I feel what I feel, I am what I am because of race and how race has been projected upon me and how, my race has colored my viewpoint. And I feel more and more people are using it as not just a statement of, who we are, but more of like a reason why to be adversarial towards each other. I don't like this race because it did this to me. I don't like this race because, I did this to them, and so on and so forth. And everyone has that viewpoint. And I just feel like this has been, in more and more recent years, just been the way we've operated. There is a natural animosity between races. I'm not particularly happy about that. I just felt like that was something that wasn't necessarily the case, and now maybe it is. And this has colored my journey, as opposed to career, as an author. And one of the things I struggle with, and I like to believe that everybody struggles with, no matter how they identify themselves, man, woman, black, white, young, old, gay, straight, whatever. I feel like whenever you're in a career, or whenever you're doing something that's beyond your sphere, however you identify yourself, there are things that make you question why your path is the way it is. And then there are things that I control. There are things that I have done. There are things I have not done, that it's just a matter of me making a choice or lack of choice, whatever it is, I have control of that. And then there are things that are beyond me that I don't even know about or I can control, that's being projected upon me because of who I am and how the world perceives me. And then the third thing of trying to tell what the difference between those things are and where do I fit and how I can do that. That brings me to this story about this gentleman I met, and that's a story in and of itself. But he says to me, he's a writer, and we met through that space, through various social medias. And he says to me, I know a guy who can help you. And this gentleman was an African American man, the man he introduced me to, the writer introduced me to, and he was not in the literary world. He was adjacent to it. His career had brought him to a position where he interacted with people in these spaces in a professional way, but he was not a writer. He was not an editor or publisher or anything like that. And in the course of his professional career, this gentleman, who I will not name, met many people, who are in the techno thriller, political thriller, action thriller, military thriller space. People who, if I said, hey, do you know this guy? You'd be like, yeah, I heard of that. Even if you don't partake in these kind of, literary endeavors. So I get connected to this guy and, hey, can we talk? He says, yeah, sure. Very friendly guy. And we talk for a couple of hours. And as it ended up, he says, I told him I'm a writer and, this is what I write and I'm having trouble making my mark. And he says, yeah, I understand. Send me your stuff. I said, okay. He said, send me your stuff. I'll shop it around for a couple of weeks. I'll let some other editors and writers and publishers, people in this space, read it. And I'm very excited about this because this is stuff, exposure you can't buy. So he's going to put me in touch with not necessarily agents, but people who are in the world. Giants of the industry, as it were. I said, cool, yeah. Give me a couple weeks to get back to you. So a couple weeks passed, and I remember I was with my daughter and her godparents and her godparents, grandparents, her grandparents' parents, and, we're having dinner or whatever, and I get this email. And I'm reading it, and it's from the guy, and he's telling me, we got some feedback for you. We're going to talk tomorrow. You and I are going to talk tomorrow. But let me just tell you a few things real quick. They said, boom, boom, boom. And one of the things he listed as one of the critiques I got from these giants of the industry is that you're too black. Your stuff is too black. And wow, I felt a certain way. It's like, what do you mean too black? And I remember walking out the house, and I'll be back, and I'm walking and thinking, and, I walked, I ended up someplace, I was like, where am I? And, but I'm like, what does this mean? What am I supposed to do with this? A black man is telling me that I'm too black. And, I felt a certain way, and I was angry, and I was like, I'm going to forget this phone call. I want to call this guy right now and cuss him out. But then, as I walked and, did this thing, I calmed down, and I thought to myself, let me hear what he's got to say. So, the next day he makes the phone call, and I'm like, yeah, cause I'm in my feelings, and he's relaying these things to me. You need to do this, you need to do that. Some of them were valid. Some of them were, I remember the one that was like, I didn't want to hear, but it was like, yeah, that's true. It's like, you got to do a better job of editing. And, I was like, yep, I can accept that. But there were some other things that just didn't make any sense. And the more he talked, the more it seemed like the undertone was this black guy, And, one of the things was like, your title was wrong. And I vacillate on how important titles are. I feel like it's one of those things that the industry keeps telling you, this is very important. Your title is very important. And I wonder, it's like, is it? Because, if I'm drawn to the cover, if I'm drawn to the story, I really don't care what the title is. I guess if it was grossly stupid, and that's kind of like some of the things they were telling me. It's like, the title of my book, my first book, is The Random Affair, which refers to the main villains, Cody Random, and the Fair, and I was thinking of Thomas Crown Affair, that kind of thing. There are affairs, and, I can accept that this may be viewed as a romantic kind of thing, but if you look at the cover and the verbiage and everything, it's clearly not that. But I was like, it was just one more plank in this thing. You shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. And it was like, the first James Bond movie and one of the novels Ian Fleming wrote was called Dr. No, and that's clearly the villain's name. Well, and this guy I'm talking to is not necessarily defending this position, but he's kind of like coming from the point of view of like, you got to receive what they're saying because this is their space that you're moving into. And that was pretty much the thrust of the conversation, which is something I expected, but I didn't expect it to be so blatantly, and I won't use the word, but what I'm referring to is so blatantly colored by race, however you see it. So we get to the more racial things, and that's when and I let him know, it's like, hey man, I'm not really sure how to take this. You told me I was too black, and you're a black guy. He says, this is not me saying, this is not me giving you my opinion. This is me telling you what people have told me. And these are guys who I've known for years, and I worked in the industry. And one of the things this particular person had did was he reached out to these different industries and said, you got to do more about getting black characters in your book. You got to do more about making black characters prominent, and you're not doing a very good job at that. And that was how, he got interested in me, because like he was saying, we need more black writers, and I'm saying, I'm a black writer, giddy up. And so that's how we got connected. That was what he brought to the table. And then in that vein, he says to me, I'm too black, and now he's telling me this is what they're saying to me. Okay. So he starts telling me some of the things that are too black. And he said there's too much slang in it. And I said, okay. And he says, you're using nicknames. And that's when it was like, okay, time out. That's ridiculous, because I've read some of these books. Everybody's got a nickname. Oh, well, that's because they're in the military, and the military did this. I'm like, look, dude, you're not going to tell me about being in the military. I was in the military. That's nicknames is not inherently racist. People, or based on race. People have nicknames because people have nicknames. That's stupid. They're telling you this. So now I'm in my feelings, and he's trying to tell me this is the pushback that I'm getting. And so, it was just one thing after another. It was just this kind of thing of, basically, we got this point. It says, so what you're saying, this is what I'm saying to him. I said, so what you're telling me is that you went to them and said, you got to do better about introducing more black characters in your book. Yes. And here are black characters in the book. Yes. And it's too black. Yes. And I says, well, that doesn't make any sense. If you're interested, and you in this case being these giants of the industry and all these different authors and everything, if you're interested in making more books and more publications involving black characters and black characters portrayed in a different light than what you're currently doing, then wouldn't a great source of that be an African-American author writing about African-American characters? And what this guy, my advocate, the guy who's my go-between between the industries, is telling me is that they want black characters, and they want you to basically say, hey, I'm a black character, and that's it. So they said, so they want, and this is what I'm saying. I said, so they want a black character, but they really just want a white character to identify themselves as black. And he says, more or less, yes. So I started thinking about things about, how they introduce black characters in different medias and TV and novels and everything. And I realized that that's exactly where they live at. They want a character to be black, but they don't want him to have black traits. And I remember at the time, there was a movie that came out, and I don't want to name that either, but it was a black character in the movie. He was a minor character. He was part of this, I think it was a SEAL team or whatever. And he was just like the rest of them. He didn't have any kind of particular standout features. He was just another guy who they could say, look, there's a black guy in the background. You can't call us racist. But he didn't, he didn't do anything except just be another guy. And so that's pretty much what I took away from this conversation, was that you need to step forward and say, I'm Joe, and I'm a black guy. And then you step back, and that's it. You don't do anything involving any form of the culture. You don't propagate any ideas that may have came from a black man. You just, I'm a black guy, and that's it. I said, I can't do that. So he says, well, here's the deal, man. They're telling you you're too black. They're telling you, this is how they perceive how audience will accept it. And you got two choices. You can either take some of the blackness out, or you can be relegated to street lit. Now, when someone says take some of the blackness out, you're too black, that implies that there is an appropriate level of blackness, which, how is that measured? Is it 2 cups? Is it 3 cups? So there's not enough black, just right amount of black, and too much black. And it's like, what does that even mean? I've never, this is something that we have done and have allowed people to do to us, to describe our culture or our identity as, being either too much or too little. You're too black, you're too this. And I never heard anybody say, you know what, man, you're just too Asian. You're just too white. That's something that is unique. Maybe it's not. Maybe because I'm not exposed to myself. But I know publicly we said that you're too black, and you're too white, and you're too this, and you're all referring to African American people. So I don't know if they were encouraged by that they can make that kind of an analogy about me that I'm too black. Well, whatever it was, I need to take some blackness out. Or be relegated to street lit. Now, whatever you think about street lit, there are some street lit that is, culturally aware and trying to make a statement. And there's other just capitalizing on my baby mama and that baby mama drama. I don't know who's reading this stuff, but, that's not the space I exist in. I exist in a space where, personally, I'm from Detroit. I'm former military. I'm a veteran. I went to college. And my guys reflect that, they're not baby mama drama. They're not drug dealers, so there's no way I could force my stuff into that. And this is not me making a judgment call or anything. This is just saying that there are apples and there are oranges and never the two shall meet. And I'm an apple and they're oranges. But, I'm a black apple and it's a black orange. So therefore we all got to go together. That's what these guys are kind of force feeding upon me. So I'm in my feelings about that. So I hang out with this guy, and I got some thinking to do. It's like, do I just say, screw these guys, and just, put my book out there, see what happens? And that was my initial feeling. It's like, I'm just going to keep struggling to find my audience. Or do I change things and get my foot in the door? I imagine that a lot of artists of various different mediums, particularly television, have to struggle with that. You look at some especially historically, some TV and movie actors who have done things that they probably were not very happy with. Robert Townsend famously made a movie about that, Hollywood Shuffle, where that was the theme. It's like, I gotta be what they want me to be so I can get into the industry. So there I am, I'm like, what do I do? And, to my chagrin, I did that. I started pulling out some slang. I started pulling out, some various terms, like you said, the nicknames and, all that kind of stuff. And I tried to make it more acceptable to an audience, thinking that if I do this, and this is kind of what the advice the guy gave me. He says, if book 1 is like that, book 3 can be more of a representation of who I am. And I know a lot of people do that, and it's nothing to be proud of, but it's like, I did some of that and nothing happened, so I just said, F it, I'm writing the way I want to write, But I have pulled it back a little bit in the first book, like particularly the nicknames. Now, there's one nickname I looked at. Well, my character's name is Eric Manning, and his nickname is E-Man. And so I pulled out E-Man, and we just call him Eric, and occasionally we call him E. And I left in E because it's just like, so I took out E-Man, went through the book and took out E-Man, and I kind of made it where it was like, this is what we used to call you, but now we're adults and we don't use that term anymore. We don't call you E-Man. But I still left in E. And the reason why I left in E, because there was so I'm writing a book, and E-Man this, and at one point, Jordan Noble, my main character, refers to him as E. So I'm going through trying to, de-black my book, and I got to a point where the guy called him E. Hey, E, we're going to do this, and it was kind of like, in that moment, I was like, this is how people talk, and that was one of the praises I've always gotten about my writing, is that I write very naturally, especially dialogue, which apparently is difficult to write. And it was like, there are things you're supposed to say. Like, I'm supposed to say, hello, Eric, let's go and do it. And Jordan said, yo, E, let's go. And so I'm at the keyboard and I'm looking at E, and it's like, but that's what the kind of thing a guy would say. If I knew a guy and I called him E-Man, and or his name is Eric, or I'm gonna not always call him Eric. Like, people call me Jay, and that makes sense. I'm staring at this one letter, and I was like, I can't do this. I can make it tighter, and I can make it more professional and more palatable to people. But I'm done with this de-blacking thing. And if it comes across black, that's your lookout, not mine, because there's no such thing as too much black. It's no such thing as too much white. It's just what it is. And I haven't sold a lot of books, and part of the reason why I'm doing videos like this, and I've always been trying to just find a market for this, because it feels like I need to justify my existence and my position, and I feel like that's something that a lot of African Americans of different stripes and different viewpoints have gone through, where it's like, it's not enough that I'm good, or it's not enough that I'm telling an interesting story. It's like, I gotta validate this blackness, and I gotta validate it among white people and black people, because among black people, we can be vicious as to, what's black enough. And, I see the industry where African Americans exist as writers, and this is not the usual space. But along those same lines, I've met other African American men who just want to tell, they don't want a black James Bond. They want their character in that world. And I'm all for that. I've stated many times about that. And that's a tough road to hoe, because it's just a situation where, it's not what's expected. It's not what people have painted us as. We're going against the grain. But we're really not. These black spies exist. Black soldiers, black lawyers, cops, everything. And we're not all this unifying voice. So, I got a little bit more emotional. I stated before, I don't really plan these things out. I'm just really trying to talk to people, and I have an idea, and I know where I want to go. So it's not very polished. You notice the light went off and everything. I'm just having a conversation, and in the course of this conversation, it's tough. I don't want to be in this world. I don't want to live in this society where everything I do is based upon race. But here we are, So that's my struggle. That's my story. As always, I always would love to hear your opinion about these things. But I just want to be seen. I want to be heard. And, I want to be judged for the content of my work and how people like it. Is this a similar situation that you've been in? What are we going to do about this as a people? Because, this is coming to a head. A lot of things in this country has just gone crazy, and a lot of it's painted with that brush of racism. So, hey, you know what? Buy The Random Affair, Black Bear, Pale Horse, all the other novels. Just, check them out. I don't know if that's going to turn the heat down. It'll put some money in my pocket and maybe put a smile on your face. I'd love to hear your comments.